All right. As I was saying that on Tuesday we started. I think one of the first things we spoke about was the importance of growing plants or growing crops under protected cultivation. I think we highlighted about 7 or 8 benefits associated with protected cultivation. What are those? Anyone? What are those benefits? Benefits associated with protected cultivation? What are those?
The benefits that there is high productivity.
Thank you so much. There is high productivity and protected cultivation. You know, with a small area, you're likely going to, you know, make a very good harvest. Okay, so that's just one of the most important benefits. Thank you so much. Anyone? What's the second benefit? Yes, Atta?
It's off-season cultivation.
All-season cultivation. Thank you so much. We indicated that with open field production, you know, you're limited by the season. You know, there's optimal time to grow vegetables. You know, there's optimal time to grow spinach, for instance. And that limits you, you know, if you're growing under open field. But under greenhouse, you are able to grow your crops throughout the year because you can be able to manipulate the climate inside that greenhouse structure. Another one.
Good fertilizer application.
Good fertilizer application. In fact, I would say precision use of resources. Okay. We know that fertilizer is very expensive. Okay, it's very expensive. Water is very expensive, especially if you're buying, you know, the water. So under protected cultivation, you're likely going to efficiently use the resources, especially the fertilizer. Okay, because, you know, we can design it. We can design the system such that the fertilizer goes straight to the root system, unlike in the open, you know, in the field production, where you just broadcast the fertilizer. At times the rain comes even before it actually dissolves, you know. There's leaching of fertilizers, of nutrients and all that. But under protected cultivation, you actually eliminate those issues. All right. I think I saw a hand up. That person can come back. Who is it? I think someone wanted to say something as well. Yeah, what's another point? Askulumeni, Masitete. By the way, I will be happy if you write your names in that chat box. Just write your name and the student number for register. Anyone? Okay, it's okay. Yes, Pilwaja?
The production of our produce is of better quality.
The quality. Thank you so much. The quality. Thank you so much. I think in January, in fact, since December, towards the end of December, and you know, beginning until mid of January, in Pietermaritzburg, there have been a number of hail incidents. I'm sure you remember that. And a serious hail, and a number of farmers were affected, and that caused a serious loss, you know, in the production, you know. And it's not only the yield which is affected when such things happen, it's the quality. I mean, imagine going to Food Lovers and you buy what? Spinach, and you get spinach which has been actually destroyed by hail. You're likely not going to buy it, okay, because the quality will be so poor. All right. So growing your crops again under protected cultivation can actually eliminate that. You are likely going to protect your crop from hail damage. Okay, but I wanted to get me clear here. Hail can be so severe at times that it even destroys the very greenhouse that you have actually, erected to grow crops. Okay, so there'll be times when the weather conditions are so severe that even the structure itself is destroyed. Okay, but in most circumstances, we are likely, going to survive without, having your structure destroyed. And in such instances, your crop will certainly be protected. Okay, on the issue of hail destroying the structure, I think it's always important. These days we talk about insurance, crop insurance. Big producers, such as Co2, they will often have crop insurance, or they only have the structures insured in case there is unseen climatic event which actually destroys their operation. All right, so that's just one thing that we should always think about when producing crops and protected cultivation. I think Londi wanted to say something. Londi or Londega. All right, that's okay. Yes, Londega?
No, say I didn't want to say anything.
Okay, sure, no problem. Thanks. Now, another thing we spoke about was by the way, I'm happy about the class, right? I'm happy. I like engagement. I don't like talking alone. So it's so good to hear people talking. Engaging a class online, it's proved to be so hard. But I think what is happening in this class is so good. Okay, I'm very impressed. Keep it up, guys, because it is through engaging that I'm even able to explain the concepts better so that everyone can actually understand. Another issue that we spoke about was a number of factors, which affect, plant growth and development. We spoke about the process of photosynthesis. We also spoke about respiration. I think one thing that I overemphasized was that your responsibility as the greenhouse manager is to ensure that the process of respiration, the process of photosynthesis is always more than the process of respiration. Okay, you should always ensure that there is enough water, there is enough CO2, the temperatures are optimal, and light. Very important. You should ensure that there's enough light inside that structure, okay, so that the process of photosynthesis will occur optimally. So your responsibility that just cannot be delegated, especially when you're managing a greenhouse, is to ensure that all those factors are provided for. Hence, it's always a good idea to do an environmental analysis. Analyze the environment. Ask which crop I want to grow. Will it survive the chosen area? If not, what can I do as the greenhouse manager to ensure that all the factors which we discussed are actually provided? Okay, even if the environment does not allow. Okay, of course, when you do that, you also need to ask yourself about the costs, because at the end of the day, the operation has to be profitable. Okay, it's not going to help you to buy water at a very expensive price, such that at the end of the season, you'll find that you spend most of your money on water and you barely make profit out of the operation, okay? You'll be running at a loss. You don't want that. So you need to analyze each factor and ask yourself, is it worthy to actually, you know, purchase that water? Or you should look for a site with much, maybe free water, okay? Or affordable, you know, source of water. Okay, so those are the questions that you need to ask yourself before choosing whether you actually should go ahead in producing under that particular area. Now, today, I want us to talk about greenhouses and their effect. This section is very short. After that, we'll go to, you know, the second section of today's lecture. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cover this section, then we'll take a short break of maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll go to the second section, and then we'll call it a day. Today is I have a double lecture with you, so that's what I'm going to do. Greenhouses and their effect. Okay, my mouse is giving me a problem. Okay, greenhouse by definition is a structure covered with translucent material that admits adequate solar radiation for photosynthesis to occur in plants. So the key word there is admit adequate solar radiation. That's very important. That means you cannot use a material which is actually going to block all that solar radiation. You don't want that. You want a material which is going to allow light to actually come inside the structure in order to facilitate the process of photosynthesis. All right, I say that because we have different materials, they have different colors. You'll get a material, especially when you talk about shade houses, you'll get a black shade house or shade material, you get green, you get blue. We have different types, okay, with different colors, made using different material, okay. And you'll often notice that that color, that material, you know, admits a certain percentage of light. For some material, they will say this material can only admit 25% light, 50% light. And my point is, you need to know what that material, what amount of light does that material admit. Okay, if it admits 20%, that is not a problem, as long as that's what you want, depending on which crop you are growing. On Tuesday, I think we briefly spoke about shade-loving plants. Shade-loving plants are often produced using material which admits, you know, around 50% light, or even lower. Okay, so it just depends on what are you producing, and then you select the right you know, material for production. Now, the greenhouse environment is actually does actually affect the microclimate. What do you understand by microclimate? Microclimate. Anyone?
The surrounding climate.
The surrounding climate, thanks, Neven. What that means is that, for instance, today in Marisburg, it could be what, 30 degrees centigrade, but inside your room, you'll find that the temperatures are much cooler. Even though in Pietermaritzburg is 30, inside your room, maybe we're gonna get what, 25. That could be caused by other factors, right? Maybe your home or house is surrounded by trees. So that becomes your microclimate, okay? So even though you have 30 degrees centigrade in Maritzburg, but for some reasons, your house or your home, you have about what? 25 degrees centigrade. That's the microclimate, okay? So my point here is that when you look at the greenhouse structure, when you compare the climate outside and inside the structure, it's always going to be different. Why? Because the greenhouse itself does affect the climate. It does change the climate. You'll notice when you go to the practical that at times it will be so hot in Pietermaritzburg, maybe the temperature is around 30, and you think that is hot. When you go to the greenhouse, you find that the temperatures inside the structure are ranging around 40. Okay, why is that the case? The greenhouse is an enclosed structure. At times, polyethylene plastic is used, and that traps heat. So it becomes so hot. Okay, so you will find that the greenhouse actually does affect what? Microclimate. Okay, outside you'll find that, you know, the light intensity is so high. When you actually go inside the structure, you'll find that the light intensity is low. Why? Depends on the material used to construct that greenhouse. The material, the plastic used, may actually reduce the amount of light coming inside the structure. If you use a darkish or black material, that light is even going to be much lower. All right, so that's the very important point that I want to emphasize, that the greenhouse does affect the microclimate. Okay, and it is your responsibility, as I've been saying, to manage that microclimate. Okay, it is your responsibility to manage that microclimate so that it is optimal for plant growth and development. And I'm sure you have heard about the global greenhouse effect. The global greenhouse effect. As the solar radiation passes through the atmosphere, it warms the planetary surface. We know that. So by definition, you know, we say greenhouse effect is a process by which thermal radiation from a planetary surface is absorbed by atmospheric greenhouse gases and is re-radiated in all directions. And I have this picture to explain the greenhouse effect. That's the sunlight, and it hits the surface. Most of that radiation goes back to the atmosphere, but you find that some of it, as it goes back, some will be radiated or to be redirected and warm the surface. Okay, so there's a lot really that happens, you know, when you see sunlight. There are a lot of processes happening in the atmosphere. Okay, and those processes have a lot of effect on what happens inside that structure. Okay, there will be times when we have to actually install what we call ground cover in order to try to trap more solar radiation inside the structure. Okay, and that often happens when the days are short and we are, you know, dealing with a long day plan, and the environment where your greenhouse is located does not offer, you know, does not offer enough light intensity. Then you install the light, white ground cover in order to, you know, improve light intensity inside the structure. Okay, but we'll discuss that later. Okay, now the most important part of this lecture is this one. what internal environmental factors does the greenhouse influence and how? This is the most important part, okay? I just want to say that again. This is the most important part of this lecture. What internal environmental factors does a greenhouse influence and how? In this section, I usually ask a question of about what? I think it's about 12 marks, where you need to explain about these internal environmental factors and how they actually influenced by the greenhouse. And this is where I say coming to lectures help, because for someone who does not come to lectures, they will think reproducing what is in the lecture notes will make them successful, which is not always the case. Let's look at the first one, temperature. Temperature is important, isn't it? We established that yesterday, that temperature is important because there are optimal temperature ranges at which certain crops, or rather crops, grow. I think yesterday I showed you a graph that showed, I think, about 4 crops. There was corn, there was cucumber, there was, I can't remember other crops. But what we noticed in that graph was that different crops will, grow optimally at different temperatures. I think there was also tomato. Okay. And that becomes so important. That becomes so important because without that information, you're likely going to grow your crops in areas or under conditions that they are not suitable for. Okay, so the first one is temperature, as I indicated. Temperature. The greenhouse, as I said, can be very hot. Okay, it's an enclosed structure, isn't it? So it can be very hot inside a structure. So when the temperature, for instance, outside is 30, inside the structure, you can easily get 40 or 35. So it becomes important that you manage that process. Okay, so if you're answering this question, there is 1 mark for temperature, and then the second mark is explaining. As I said, the greenhouse can be very hot. Then you make an example, if the temperature outside is 30, under greenhouse, you can easily get 35 degrees centigrade. As a greenhouse manager, you need to manage that. How do you manage that? You ventilate, you open the doors, you open the windows of the greenhouse. If you can, and if you can afford, you can do what is called forced cooling. You will see that when you go for the practical. Okay. Is that clear? Is that clear?
Yes. Yes, it is clear.
The temperature. Okay. So that's how you explain. You explain the how greenhouse affect the temperature. Okay. You can read that. You can read that. Okay. But you'll find that my explanation is actually not covered by that what is written there, and that is actually deliberate. Okay. And the second one is solar radiation. Solar radiation. Of course, you can say light intensity or just light. I will always, give a mark for that. Okay. So you can say light intensity, solar radiation. I will always give you the mark for that. Solar radiation. Remember, we can use different materials to construct the greenhouse. And I think on Tuesday, I spoke about PAR, photosynthetic active radiation, which I indicated that it ranges between 400 to 700, with 700 or 750 being better. That's what we want. We want high light intensity. At 400, most plants are likely going to suffer. Okay, if the environment is offering you 400, you're likely going to need to purchase artificial bulbs in order to supplement that light intensity. But the point that I want to establish is that light intensity is, or rather greenhouse does affect light intensity depending on the material that you've actually chosen. Some material, or depending on, in fact, even on the color, some material, covering material will absorb, or rather will admit high light intensity, whilst other material will admit very, low light intensity. Okay, so depending on what you have chosen as the covering material, the light intensity will actually be affected. How to improve it? At times, you'll find that all that you have to do is to clean the covering material. There are some covering materials that, with age, they become dirty, okay? Such that the amount of light coming inside the structure is significantly reduced, okay? So that's just one thing that you can do. You clean the covering material in order to increase the amount of light admitted by the material. Okay, I think I will show you, maybe next week I'll show you some very nice pictures of aging covering material, which ends up, negatively affecting plant growth and development. All right. So that's what you can actually do. Another thing that you can do is to install ground cover. Okay, if you notice that the material, the light intensity, the solar radiation inside the structure is low, you can actually install what we call white ground cover. Okay, that will assist you in actually increasing the light intensity. With regards, I think I forgot something with regards to the temperature. If the temperature inside the structure is low, maybe in winter, it's too low in winter, you can install the black ground cover. We install the black ground cover. We just put that plastic on the floor of the greenhouse, and the temperatures will certainly increase. Okay. So that's how you manage the temperature. And in terms of light intensity, you install the white ground cover, and light intensity will actually be increased. Is that clear? And then there's relative humidity. Relative humidity. We know that relative, okay, Nelly-Swan, your hand is up. Over to you.
Yes, may you please repeat for the light intensity?
Which one?
Yes.
Yo, okay. Okay, light intensity. Light intensity, I'm saying here, the material, the covering material that you use to construct the greenhouse will have an effect on how much light is admitted, on how much light gets to the plant. All right. There are some material which, when they age, when they get old, they change color. There's one, it's called, I think it's called bicarbonate material. It changes color when it's old. All right. And in such instances, the color, the light intensity will be reduced, unfortunately. Some material with time, they will they will trap dust, and it is your responsibility to actually clean that material. If you cannot clean it, it must be replaced, because if you don't replace it, the amount of light coming inside the structure will be low. And when that happens, the process of photosynthesis will negatively be affected. All right. And you can also install white ground cover to increase that light intensity. If you are growing what are called shade-loving plants, it will be a good idea again to use a shade material which admits less light. Some farmers, you'll find them using black material, or the green shade houses as the material, because such material admit less light, which is very conducive for shade loving plants. Does that help, Sissy?
Yes. Yeah,
Thank you. Okay, I think you can lower your hand. Thank you. And then relative humidity. We know that relative humidity is linked to disease development. Anyone who's doing plant pathology, I'm sure you'll agree. High relative humidity is linked to disease development, okay? And the structure is enclosed, isn't it? You have a door, you have it's covered with polyethylene plastic or with any material that you have chosen. And the plants inside there, they are growing, they are absorbing water. So the relative humidity is likely going to be high. I mean, it's hot there. The process of evapotranspiration is occurring. So the relative humidity is going to be high. And when that happens, the plant or the plants are going to be very prone to disease development. How do you control that? You do ventilation. You open the door, you open the windows of the greenhouse, or you put fans to actually extract extra heat and that extra relative humidity and extract it outside the structure. Okay, if you fail to do that, you're likely going to experience high disease incidence inside the structure, and you don't want that. Okay, so that slide just explains what I've just said. And then there is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, very important. We know that carbon dioxide plays a very key role in the process of photosynthesis. And again, the structure is enclosed, isn't it? We have the covering material, greenhouse, and then we have plants, depending really on which crop you're dealing with. It could be a number of hundreds plants. Okay, so you have those plants, the structure is enclosed. You're likely going to experience low CO2 levels because the plants are growing, the plants are respiring. So the plants may end up actually using all the available CO2. Okay, because the structure is enclosed, there's no interaction between this the inside and the outside world. I'll put it that way. And the question is, how do you solve that? You ventilate again. You ensure that there's air coming from the outside, goes inside the structure. If you ventilate your structure, you open the doors, you open the windows, you will actually ensure that the CO2 levels are always higher. Okay, you just need around 0.03% CO2, and then the plants will be happy. Okay, so CO2 can be a limiting factor. Hence, I just cannot overemphasize the importance of ventilating the structure. There's what is called CO2 enrichment. I think I'll later discuss that. I think maybe next week, if I'm not mistaken. CO2 enrichment, and it's been linked with high yields. When you're doing CO2 enrichment, you should consider increasing the input of other factors as well, such as fertilizers, such as water. Otherwise, we're likely going to have a problem. If the plant is highly photosynthesizing, but there's less water, there's less nutrients, we are likely going to face a problem. Okay, so when you do CO2 enrichment, you should always consider increasing other inputs. I hope that is clear. Okay, now there are a lot of experiments ongoing on CO2 enrichment, even in field crops. I think there's emerging evidence that CO2 enrichment does increase yields even under field conditions. Okay, as I indicated, I will later, tell you what you can actually use to enrich, your plants with CO2. There are many options, and you'll see, how easy it is to actually apply them even under field conditions. Are there any questions? 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 Asikhulumeni kaloku. Okay, everything seems to be clear. The time is 9:22. Can we come back at 9? Lozi, do you want to say something? I can't hear you, Lozi.
I said no, sorry.
All right, Londega.
Ngicela ukubuza ukuthi lapha kwi-light intensity indlela ochaze ngayo ukuthi we be using ama-material azoba favorable for that particular plant esiplantile mase si-installa white ground cover, on which is angikubonanga kwi-definition le under lama notes wabhalile. So
It's deliberate.
So ke mase sichaza lo 12 marks, so
Yes.
faka lama point owachazayo okanye sofaka lawa asema nothini kuma slide, so zama ukuprema lawa okanye
No, use the
ngale
ones.
ndlela ochaza ngayo.
When you need to use what I told you, and we notes, yeah, there are some which are relevant. For instance, under relative humidity, there's a lot of material which is relevant that you can use. But for temperature, for instance, there's nothing there that you can use, okay? And I've done that deliberately, okay? Under temperature is nothing. So if you say temperature, then write everything there. You will only get a mark for mentioning the temperature, then everything will be wrong, okay? So the aim really is to ensure that you understand the concepts, okay? Not always relying on what is put on the notes. I mean, if you read the question and you understand the question, then you'll almost tell that what is in the notes does not actually answer the question. So the aim really is to try to trigger your thinking capabilities. Yeah, okay, I hope that that answers you. Are you happy?
Yes, I'm happy, sir.
Thank you. Okay, the time is 9:24. Let's come back at 9:30. 9:30. Welcome back. I'm sure you have gotten time to synthesize what we've just covered. If there are any questions, I'll be able, rather, I'm willing to respond to those questions. Any issues emanating from what we have just covered? Londega, is that an old hand?
Yes, it's an old hand.
Okay, you can take it down. Thank you. Okay, and now let's look at site selection and preparation. The objective of this section is just to highlight what you should consider when selecting a site. Okay, and this is very important. This is what can, you know, define whether your operation is going to be successful or unsuccessful. If you properly and diligently do this part, follow, you know, the recommendations proposed in this section, you're likely going to have a very successful greenhouse operation. If not, you're likely going to have a problem. And at times, you can actually be forced to close down the operation. All right, so this is just one of the most important stages. Yes, it is a good idea to properly analyze the environment, you know, the temperatures, whether we have enough light intensity, and all the issues that, you know, we've already covered. But this is also very important. Okay, even here, I usually ask a question of about 15 marks. It can be less, 12 or 18 at times. But I just want to highlight that this is actually very important. Site selection. Okay. Now, these are the factors that you should always consider when you're selecting a site for greenhouse production. The first one is room for expansion. The second one is topography. The third one is land use projection. The fourth one is climate. I think we've done, you know, justice and the climate already, but I'll cover some concepts that probably did not cover in the sections that we've covered already. Then the fifth one is labor supply. The sixth one is accessibility. The seventh one is water. And the last one is orientation. Let's look at the first one, room for expansion. Here we're saying that when you are acquiring a piece of land for greenhouse production, you should always acquire land which is larger than the immediate needs. And that land can actually be used, you know, for unforeseen needs. And remember, for, you know, all the pieces of land that you acquire, you are likely going to use 10% of that land for service buildings. Service buildings, that's where you actually put your tractors, the tools, the offices, and stuff like that. Okay, so, you know, when you get that piece of land, 10% of that land, you should not count it as a greenhouse floor area. That 10% actually goes for service buildings. Okay. Now, the reason why, again, I say that you should acquire land larger than the immediate needs is that when you start any business, you have a budget for actually starting the business, right? Maybe you have what? Maybe you have 50,000 or 100,000 rands. That's the money that we have. And most of the time, people will just go and get a piece of land which can be accommodated in that 100,000 rands, in terms of the budget of the entire operation. And I'm saying that is the wrong approach. Always look for a big piece of land so that when your business is doing very well in 5 years' time or 3 years' time, you can be able to actually extend the operation. Okay? Because it's a good idea to just have everything in one area. Always try to avoid having one operation in Pietermaritzburg, one operation in Hilton, one in Durban. Just try to have one big operation in one place. Okay, so that is why I just cannot overemphasize the importance of acquiring a large piece of land, which is probably more than what you currently foresee. So that if there are unforeseen needs or unforeseen expansion of the business in the near future, you will not be stressed out looking for another piece of land. I hope that is clear. Topography is another important part. Generally, greenhouse operations should be on fairly level, ground. Okay, and it can be very expensive, to create a site. We know that it's very expensive. Okay, I know machines that will cost more than 10,000 rands a day. So if your operation is big and the site that you got is not level, you will spend a lot of money just creating the site before even starting planting or starting, putting the greenhouse structure. And that could prove to be very expensive. So when you're looking for a piece of land, look for a land which is fairly level, and that becomes advantageous, especially if you're going to use machines, okay, inside the structure. I'm sure you've noticed that now people are talking about robots. It becomes so easy to actually use such robots if the site is level, okay, because most of the time the people who program those robots would always think of a level site. They never put a site which is not level as a factor. They always put a level site as just a constant, okay, when they are programming. So that becomes very important. Okay, and the site should be well drained as well. Remember, there's excessive use of water, under greenhouse operation. So the site has to be well drained. Otherwise, you will be having mud all over the operation if the site is not well drained. Okay, so the site has to be well drained. That's very important. And it will always be a good idea to get a site with natural windbreaks, such as trees or hills. All right, why? Greenhouse operations, can be badly affected by strong winds, and you don't want that. I think I've had a picture somewhere. Yeah, there. You see, this is what wind can do to your operation. Okay. Obviously, when that happens, you have lost big time. You need to get another plastic and reinstall possible the entire structure, and you don't want that. So you should, look for a structure, or rather should look for a site with natural windbreaks. Alternatively, you can plant the windbreaks before installing the actual structure to prevent winds, from damaging the structure. I think these slides just, explaining, the issue that I've just spoken about. Generally, we're saying that topography should be less than, the slope should be less than 5%. Okay, if it's more than 5%, you are likely going to need grading, which I've already highlighted that it's quite a very expensive task. And now you should remember that when you're leveling the site, the topsoil can actually be removed. Okay, depending really whether you're going to use the soil for growing the plants, or you're going to use the growing medium, such as your vermiculite or your vermicompost or your pan bag. With different types of growing media. If you're going to use growing medium, that's fine. But if you're going to use the soil, then the topsoil has to be replaced. So that means after you have graded that site, you need to buy the topsoil, or you need to get it somewhere, so that you replace that topsoil which has been removed during grading. So that's very important. Okay, this is why I say that the site has to be level, because you'll find some operations, especially overseas, you'll find them using these robots for planting or for placing the plants on the floor of the greenhouse. So it becomes very easy if the site is level. It becomes so easy to actually employ these robots. Another important issue is the land use protection. Land use protection simply means knowing the plans, of the government with regards to that particular piece of land. Local zoning and tax laws are subject to change. We know that. Laws change every day. At times, managed people will come to a town and say, we want that piece of land. And if maybe you have been leasing, or that land has been leased to you by the government, you may actually be forced to vacate a piece of land. Okay, and that land will be given to someone else with maybe more money. Someone will create more job opportunities for the area, and so the laws change every day. So it's always a good idea to familiarize yourself with those possible changes, okay, to protect yourself. Such changes have actually brought the termination of many greenhouses, around the world. Okay, so you really have to familiarize yourself with those laws. Know what is the municipality thinking about that piece of land. If you do that, you'll actually be protecting yourself. Climate is very important. Generally, you should always avoid areas with frequent fog and shadows. Remember, most crops, they love high light intensity. So shadows or low light intensity is not good for most crops. So such areas have to be avoided. High light intensity is important, especially when you're growing ornamental plants such as carnations. A carnation requires high light intensity and long days. So climate becomes so important, when actually producing that particular crop. So as I have already indicated, always think about which crop you want to produce and whether, the climate of that particular, piece of land you're eyeing will be suitable for the crop. I think the last point there actually, say what I've just said, that the site should be selected with a specific crop in mind. You should have a specific crop in mind when you're selecting the site. And labor supply, that's so important, guys. Greenhouse operations are labor intensive. So you really have to look at the present and future labor needs, and you should look at the area where you're thinking of having your operation, whether will that area have enough people to actually work in your operation. At times people will put, or rather will get a piece of land closer to the urban area. When you do that, you need to think about the wage level. I mean, life, or rather the cost of living in urban areas is quite steep. So when you decide to have an operation in the urban area, you need to think about the wage level, all right? But if your operation is closer to the rural areas where the cost of living is usually low, you'll find that people will be, comfortable with working for you, okay? Because they don't, pay a lot of bills such as housing and all those issues, than the people actually stay in urban areas, okay? So that's just one thing that we need to think about. Higher wages can actually be compensated through automation, which is a sad thing, isn't it? Because we're saying that there are no jobs and more companies are actually employing or using automation to actually cut on salaries. So if you do that, you're certainly going to reduce the number of employees, and the productivity will be high. Okay, so bad as it is, but if you're running an operation, those are the choices that likely going to consider in order to reduce the cost of running the operation. I think CNN in 2016 ran an article which was titled "Smart Robots Could Soon Steal Your Jobs." And that is a reality, okay, especially in the farming industry. More robots are being used to replace employees, okay? And I think that is why we actually need to think about how we go on about producing even the skills that we acquire have to speak to the needs of the industry. Okay, that means even if you're doing what, plant pathology, even if you're doing BSc crop and horticulture, if you're doing BSc soil science, you should think about getting one certificate on Internet of Things, on artificial intelligence. I mean, those things are freely available. I mean, we have, I think it's called Google Africa, for instance, where you actually enrolled in Google, you take those courses where you're exposed, to these developing technologies, and they are becoming so important in agriculture as more and more people want, those technologies employed in assisting them in making decisions, in their operations. Okay, so those are the things that you should also consider, even if they are not part of the modules that you're doing, but in your spare time, just enroll yourself in those programs. They are free, but they teach you a lot, especially about the robots and the current trends, in the world of agriculture, and they can be applied in many industries. And another factor is accessibility. When you think about the site for your greenhouse operation, you should think about the shipping routes. If the area is very far, from the shipping routes, that will mean, especially that means that relates to when you're producing for international markets. Okay, so if you're producing for international markets and your site is too far from from the shipping routes or from the harbor, that will mean you need to spend a lot of money on the transportation cost, as well as transferring actually oil from the harbor to operation. Remember, you have tractors there. There's a lot that requires fuel. Okay, so you'll be transporting these resources for very long distances, and that could prove to be very costly for your operation. Okay, so it's the inputs that must be transported, and it's the produce which must be taken again from your operation to the harbor, and that could prove to be very expensive, as I've already indicated. Okay, so you really need to think about how close should your operation be to the harbor or to the market. Let me put it that way, to the market. Okay, if your target market is Joburg, and when I am Pietermaritzburg, that's not a very good idea, because we're going to spend a lot of money transporting your product from Maritzburg to Joburg. Okay, so the point is, try to be closer to the market. Accessibility. Try to be closer to the market. And then the water is so important, and it's so sad that it's often overlooked. Before you purchase a site, you need to know what are the available sources of water, and that water must be tested for quality. Okay, because the cost of removing ions such as sodium chloride or bicarbonate can be very high. So you need a source of water which is free from those ions. Okay, and river water is often subject to disease organisms and may require expensive chlorination. But if that's all that is available, then you should consider investing on water purification, or rather purifying technologies. So I just cannot overemphasize the importance. People look at all other factors that I've spoken about and forget about water. And without water, really, in agriculture, there's nothing that you can do, especially under greenhouse production. Okay, so that is very important. As I like to emphasize it again, don't look for quantity alone, also assess the quality. Of course, the other factors, the orientation issue, you need to ensure that there's minimal shading. You need to look for prevailing winds and try to install windbreaks to actually deal with those winds. Of course, if you're growing your crops in the soil, that soil has to be tested. Okay, if you are going to use other growing media, that has to be determined in terms of availability as well as cost as well. Okay, I think I've already touched on accessibility and roads, packing and cold storage facilities. That's very important. Depending on the produce that you having in your farm, there'll be needs. There'll be a need at times to cold store your produce, before sending it to the market. Instead of sending your produce to other people's cold storage facilities, it's a good idea to have your own, okay? Just build your own cold storage facility. By so doing, you'll actually be reducing on the cost. Can also consider having a very small packing house where the produce is quickly packed before it's dispatched to the market. I think one great operation which ticks, a lot of these boxes is the Dube Agri Zone. It's in Durban. It's called Dube Trade Port. Please go to that website, www.dubetradeport.co.za. You'll actually be blown away, how that Dube Trade Port is a game changer, in terms of protected cultivation, because it's very close to the airport. The produce, is produced, in that operation, and then it's sent to the airport where it's cold stored. There's a very, state of, or a big state of the art. There's a big state of the art cold storage facility at King Shaka Airport, where the produce, is stored before being freighted to other countries. Okay, so I think Dube Trade Port is just one of the great examples, which illustrate what we have just covered here. Obviously, it was easy to actually have that Dube Trade Port because government was part of the investors. Okay, so it was much easy. Okay, but I mean, getting that piece of land will be very expensive for an ordinary person. And it's along what N2. I mean, that piece of land is very expensive. You'll agree with me. And getting people who are going to work there could also prove to be expensive. Okay, because the cost of living around that area is also expensive. Okay, so you will find that some of the points that we've discussed actually agree with the concept of Dube Trade Port, but we'll also find that some of the points may actually be in disagreement. Of course, it depends on who's the investor. I think I'd like to emphasize that. That Dube Trade Port uses the most advanced technologies for farming, and a lot of technology has been incorporated in the operation, and the operation is running so well. All right, I think that is it. Questions? Are there any questions?
Where are you doing practicals?
Anguzwa?
When are you doing practicals?
When?
Yes.
I indicated that I will cover a number of lectures before we go to the practicals. I will cover a number of lectures, yeah, before we go for the practicals, because what you see in the practical should be what you've already covered. So it could be next week, I think. Next week, highly likely, or the other week, but that will be communicated with you. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone?
All right. Mr.
Yes, Mtutuzi.
I have a question. Like on tomorrow, on our tables, on our timetable shows that tomorrow got 2 slides. Which one are you gonna use tomorrow?
Thank you so much for that, because I almost forgot. Tomorrow in the timetable we have 7:45, and then there is 11:25. 7:40, I think 7:40.
7:45.
7:45, We'll use the 11:25 one.
Okay, thank you.
So you remove the 7:45. We're not going to use that one. We'll use the 7. I mean then 11:25. Please do tell others who are not here that to use the 11:45 lecture. Always, not just tomorrow. We'll never going to use the 7:45 one. Thanks so much. Anyone? Okay, I think that's all then. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow at 11:25. Enjoy the rest of your day. The notes will be posted on Learn 22. Bye bye.